بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نلتقي بكم مجددا لنواصل أعمال اليوم الأول في المؤتمر الرابع لهيئة جودة التعليم والتدريب، ونبدأ بالجلسة الثانية تحت عنوان جودة التعليم العالي في عالم متغير، الأمور الملحة في ضمن التعليم الافتراضي، والتي ستمتد بإذن الله تعالى حتى الساعة 1:45 ظهرا. يسرنا دعوة الدكتورة هالة عبيد مستشار الشؤون الأكاديمية في إدارة مراجعة أداء مؤسسات التعليم العالي بهيئة جودة التعليم والتدريب لتقديم ضيوفها الكرام وإدارتها مشكورة، فلتتفضل.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for attending this session. I am Dr. Hala Obeid, the moderator of this second session of the conference, which consists of two presentations, followed by a 15-minute session for questions. And on behalf of BQA, I'd like to welcome you all. Higher education is facing a global challenge with COVID-19. The pandemic has changed a lot of things in our quality assurance practices. Now, let us get some inside secrets from our distinguished speakers, Mr. Douglas Blackstock and Dr. Tess Goodlife. First, we will start with Mr. Blackstock. Today, I am pleased to welcome a very special speaker from UK, Mr. Blackstock, who is the Chief Executive of the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education, QAA at UK since 2015. And currently, he is a board member of the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, INCA. He will be sharing with us his expert opinion on QAA practices during COVID-19. With that, I ask you to give your full attention and help me to welcome Mr. Blackstock to share his thoughts with us. Mr. Blackstock, the floor is yours, and I'm going to share the slides with you. Please, Mr. Blackstock.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I hope I can drive slides and speak at the same time. Good morning from a beautiful sunny day here in the UK. Good afternoon to colleagues in Bahrain and around the world. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to join this session today. It's a great pleasure. I would like to put on record my personal appreciation and that of QAA to the BQA and to the higher education sector in Bahrain. It was a great pleasure to visit Manama in 2017, and I learned a lot from the welcome opportunity I had to visit the University of Bahrain and Bahrain Polytechnic, and also to meet so many other senior colleagues from universities and the Higher Education Commission and Economic Development Board and other organisations. The UK and Bahrain's higher education sectors have a long-standing relationship, and I hope it continues. I'm just trying to move my slide. Okay, you've got it, sharing. Oh, sorry, I'm moving too quickly. We're here to discuss pressing issues. There is, of course, only one issue which is more significant than any other at this particular moment in time. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the last year has been an incredible challenge for the higher education sector and for governments and communities across the world. And I certainly hope that by next year, we are able to have these kind of events in person again. The pandemic has created a range of issues for higher education quality. We've seen the massive shift to online and hybrid learning, the challenging public health needs, the need for research into vaccines, the impact of things like digital poverty, and the restrictions in international travel. And in all of these issues and others, quality agencies across the globe have had an important role working to support higher education institutions. Our agency, QAA, is a UK-wide body. We are the independent, not-for-profit higher education quality agency, the only body recognised to assess the standards and quality of UK universities, and are trusted and recognised by governments in all of the 4 nations of the UK, working in partnership with funders and regulators. Each of the 4 UK nations has a different and distinct approach to higher education quality, and our role is to support each tailored quality approach within a coherent UK-wide system, but we also work internationally to help address shared challenges to quality and standards. And it's within this context that we've been working to support the UK higher education sector throughout the pandemic, working collaboratively to provide guidance for our members as well as the wider higher education community. In the UK and around the world, the initial emergency response from higher education sector to the pandemic was an extraordinary effort. A transition to mass online and digital delivery and learning that was both rapid and effective. It accelerated change, brought forward strategic plans and instigated new ways of working. Universities and colleges showed that, contrary to stereotype, they were able to move quickly, decisively and collaboratively. In the UK, most providers had emergency planning groups in place by this time last year, assessing the risks posed by the pandemic and to chart a path forward. The majority engaged students in planning and design and ensured that communication with staff and students was clear and constructive. There was a real sector interest in maintaining quality and standards online and in working together to do so. We saw this in QA's initial work. From March onwards, QA produced public guidance, over 30 briefings and resources, along with countless webinars and advice to support the sector. They were developed with and by the higher education community, including student bodies, regulators and funders. The involvement of large numbers of staff from institutions helped identify good practice in this early stage, which was disseminated across the sector. We had over 2,000 delegates from 276 organisations attending our webinars developing this guidance. Because it reflected sector emerging practice, this guidance then provided confidence to government and ministers across the UK. We met with ministers in England, Wales and Scotland and with government representatives in Northern Ireland to ensure that each were being reassured by the level of commitment to securing academic standards in our institutions. But there are some areas which presented a challenge, both for the sector in the UK and internationally. The success in transitioning online largely depended on the starting position of an institution. Those which had already been developing online learning programs or which had a high staff and student digital literacy found the transition easier than others. Across the world, we saw real variations in providers' readiness, capacity, expertise, and population connectivity through the internet. There were differences in geography. There were differences between types of institutions, with small institutions often equipped with greater flexibility, but fewer resources. Many providers expressed concern about digital poverty among students and disparities in internet access for students in areas of deprivation or in rural areas. We heard from colleagues in Nigeria that students and staff in some places struggled to even access electricity. Given this variation, it was critically important that institutions work together, sharing positive pedagogical practice and maintaining an overall flexibility of approach. We began to see a strong level of collaboration and flexibility, and maintaining this remains important to the sector's response today. But there are new challenges. After the initial stage, we saw the development. Sorry, I'll just move my slide back again. After the initial stage, we saw, I'm afraid the time difference between me and the host is causing me some confusion. After the initial stage, we saw the development of hybrid and blended learning approaches. Flexibility remained a priority as public health restrictions changed often in local areas. At QAA, we published a toolkit for enhancing quality in a digital environment. The key considerations we included are here. The first was that there needed to be a strategic focus, making sure there is clear management and focused goal setting. There should also be careful programme design, approval and management. Typically, digital delivery demands greater preparation time. There needs to be consideration not only of the tools for digital delivery, but also the pedagogical approach and the learning outcomes. There was a need to validate large numbers of online variants of programmes, often which had initially had been designed for on-site delivery. This needed streamlined approval processes and risk mitigation systems. And we saw institutions working together to discuss programme development, which in ordinary times might have been a commercially sensitive area. There should also be a focus on student-centred learning, teaching and assessment. One of the core features of quality in the European standards and guidelines and in many other regions of the world is close engagement with students individually and collectively. Many providers in the UK brought academics and students together to co-create virtual learning materials. Support for teaching staff. We saw some providers conducting skills audits, which contributed to communities of practice and platforms for peer support and development. Staff need to have the physical tools in terms of IT equipment and internet access, but also the skills to use them effectively. And similarly, learning resources and student support. Providers needed to support students' access needs, consider alternative assessment requirements, or work with students to identify alternative learning outcomes. There are still concerns about the importance of culture and collective well-being for students, and students and staff need the social and interpersonal side of learning. For quality agencies, there was, of course, the added challenge of how to conduct external reviews. Many of our processes were initially paused or moved online. It raised the question of how to hold in-depth, detailed reviews with staff and students who were spread around and not necessarily in a single location. And we had to internally audit all of our review processes to ensure they were consistent and secure. Of course, one of the positive aspects of this shift has been a dramatic improvement in the carbon footprint of quality assurance. Remote working has meant reviews are greener and cheaper, reducing carbon emissions of quality assurance and making savings for providers. This is another pressing global challenge which requires an international response. Just yesterday, QA published new guidance on education for sustainable development, which gives advice on how the UN Sustainable Development Goals can feed into curriculum design, as well as teaching, learning and assessment approaches. The higher education sector has a key role in helping transition society towards a sustainable future. When we think about these pressing issues and others, the key solution for us in QA is partnership. We've learned a huge amount from our international partnerships during the pandemic. We have close relationships and strategic links with many international quality assurance agencies, including the BQA. It's essential to share experiences and learn from each other in forums like this. Our International Partners Forum helped us share experience with more than 20 countries in their responses to COVID-19. We were able to publish international examples of practice, which fed directly into responses here in the UK. Our partnerships also help us to act on other challenges to quality and standards. We are very concerned about the rise of essay mills and other forms of cheating, plagiarism, and academic misconduct in the online landscape. So here in the UK, we recently launched a charter signed by over 100 universities to take action to support and defend academic integrity. This is an integral part of learning, teaching and assessment practice, and it needs close cooperation around the world. And we've been working particularly with colleagues in New Zealand, Australia and across Europe to share understanding. But I also want to talk about the opportunities too. In many ways, the pandemic, sorry, Tess, I've moved on to you now. These slides are causing me havoc here. In many ways, the pandemic has accelerated trends that were already apparent. There are new discussions about flexible learning, micro-credentials, shorter credit-bearing courses, the structure of the academic year, and even what institutions should look like in the future. Within the UK, we're seeing reform to the relationship between further and higher education. Across the UK, there is greater interest in bringing the two closer, working closely together on skills and the needs for lifelong learning. Thinking about global opportunities, we're already interested in the future of transnational education. 142 UK universities have students on T&E programmes, and Bahrain is regularly among the top 5 countries in the region for UK T&E. I remember we jointly participated with colleagues from BQA through ANQUAE and QA through ENCA in the quality assurance of cross-border higher education project in 2013 to 2016. T&E relies on shared trust between international stakeholders, And we've recently launched a new review method for the quality evaluation of TNE for a 5-year programme through to 2026. No doubt there are many more developments to come. The message we have through all of this is that flexibility and collaboration are at the heart, whether in designing reviews, planning response frameworks, or providing clear communication and support for students. The most effective practice has been delivered by working together. So as we continue to navigate the impact of the pandemic, that spirit of collaboration should help strengthen confidence in the integrity and global reputation of higher education. Colleagues, it has absolutely been an honour to address this event today, and I'm looking forward to answering the questions and the discussion, and wish everyone well and stay safe and take care. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Blackstock, for your informative session about handling the quality assurance during the pandemic in UK. Now, I'd like to welcome our second distinguished speaker from France, Dr. Tess Goodlife, who is currently a consultant in the quality of higher education and formerly acted as a Deputy CEO for Technical Affairs for the Oman Academic Accreditation Authority, OAAA. She will be sharing with us her thoughts on the world of virtual learning and its implication on quality assurance. With that, I ask you to give your full attention and enjoy her presentation. Dr. Goodlife, the floor is yours, and now I'm going to share the presentation with you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Haller. I appreciate the very kind introduction and the opportunity to contribute to this very important conference. It's a delight to be part of this with so many people. Bahrain does have a special place in my heart, as we used to live in Bahrain before we moved to Saudi and then on to Oman. So it's always been a great pleasure to have anything to do with the BQA. And I've had the pleasure of serving on a review panel for the University of Bahrain's College of Education. So a delight to be here today talking about a very important topic, talking about the implications for quality assurance. Okay, I'm back here. And we're going to be looking at the implications for external quality assurance. The aim of today's presentation is to look at how external quality assurance responds to and assures the quality of learning taking place in virtual environments. I appreciate that these are flexible and fluid times, and that this topic is a moving feast, but hopefully will provoke some thoughts about the type of approaches being used to look at quality assurance internationally. And it's great to have such an international audience to be able to engage with, to explore these topics. Okay, let's look at terminology. What do we mean, first of all, by virtual learning? So looking at some of the definitions, we're looking at the focus of the absence of traditional classroom environments, face-to-face learning, that we're looking at using the internet and special software, looking at virtual learning environments that perform on a web-based platform, which are looking at all digital aspects of the courses of study. And the final is looking at electronic study content, which could be asynchronous, which means people are studying at their own pace, or live web conferencing like we're doing today, synchronous online teaching and tutoring. And all these aspects are covered in the term virtual learning. As you can see, there are a number of terms that we kind of bandy about when we're talking about this area, whether it's distance, blended, online, virtual, e-learning. And I'm a bit of a, looking at the QAA's taxonomy of respect to Douglas Blackstock and his organization for the development of this taxonomy. And one of the things that comes up with the use of the word virtual is that it has connotations of something that's perhaps artificial or inauthentic or not perhaps real. So there are connotations with the terminology that we're using. And I think we need to be aware of the impact of that. You working in higher education will be familiar with a number of virtual learning education platforms. These are not an exhaustive list, but some of these that you'll be familiar with and becoming more familiar with in terms of supporting the online learning environment in higher education institutions. So picking up really from Douglas's former presentation, so what are the pressing issues in virtual learning that have implications for external quality assurance? Firstly, how institutions have responded to the disruption and rapid growth in virtual learning provision, and Douglas has touched on a few of these. How have institutions ensured equity of access? We've referred to digital poverty and inequality in terms of access to digital resources and networks, and the quality itself of the learning experience. How are students engaged? How do you ensure that they're not playing online games while they're engaging in a virtual lecture or session? And how is interactivity supported? Is it are we gone back to a jug to mug approach, or how are sessions built around engaging students? And how are staff and students prepared for the virtual learning environment? We've heard about peer support and communities of practice, but what's happening in institutions to support all staff who come to the table with a variety of experience and varying levels of digital literacy? And what are the implications for program design itself? As we've heard, there was a sudden move, there was a rapid move to moving online and face-to-face courses to an online environment, but have they always been appropriate? And has it been possible to adapt them for a different learning environment? And how is technology used to support the learning processes? And obviously planning and investment is important. And how have institutions supported the implementation of technology and strategy? As we've heard, institutions have been at different levels of preparedness. What has been the impact of investment and resourcing? And how is secure and robust assessment monitored? How is academic integrity assured in a virtual online learning environment? And one of the key aspects is how is the practical side of the learning experience, where students are expected to work in labs, where they're meant to have access to workshops, practica, internships. How is that managed within an external quality, within the institutions, and how is that evaluated within an external quality assurance environment? And really importantly, how are standards maintained and the achievement of learning outcomes supported? How is a student graduating from a virtual learning experience, how is their qualification given the same value, has the same validity as students who are coming from a traditional higher education background? And we'll talk a little bit about trust of these qualifications in a moment. So as you can see from the World Bank data, over 200 million tertiary level students have had a disrupted education. And these are the figures from 2019. But we also need to acknowledge that before the pandemic, there has been a significant shift to a greater percentage of students moving to online learning, whether they're postgraduate students, students in work, or students at open universities, the number of which have been increasing. According to data, around 35 to 40% of students in the American system were studying 100% distance learning, which I think reflects not just the current situation, but also that there was a growth happening before then. Agencies, as you've heard from Douglas, have been very active in supporting the sector, such as provision of links to experts, advice on moving to a virtual learning environment, provision of webinars, and we've had reference to ENQA, and they produced a document on how the EQA standards can be applied in a virtual learning environment. One of the benefits, I would say, of this is that these resources being made available online means that all staff can access these. It's not now the champions of quality who might be dotted around different institutions, but there's almost a democratization of access to external quality assurance resources, and it means that there's a much wider access to these. In the region, there's obviously been respect of the COVID-19 efforts. Here you can see from Kuwait and Bahrain, the BQA ran a webinar, which is available on YouTube, on the efforts that external quality agencies have made to support their activities during the COVID-19 outbreak. The key message I think we've heard is this ability to respond quickly to risk and crisis management. And this has been reflected in the Inquiry principles for crisis management, because these are really unknown waters. But as you can see from the top 3 points in these principles for crisis management, the focus has been on integrity, student protection, and equity and access. And these are still really important now, but the focus has really been on how do we manage this transition and what will happen in the future as a result of this sudden move to the increase in virtual learning. What has been the implication for external quality agencies? Well, we know that there's been a postponement of activities for a number of agencies, that there've been development of on-site and online approaches to the visits. So there's been a hybrid approach, that it's about having some of the panel members in different parts of the world, some of the panel members on site, and moving to a fully online review. But this isn't just necessarily the choice of the agency, but it's also working within government regulations with restrictions on travel, but also higher education institutions. This is a clip taken from the BQA webinar, which brought together a number of agencies who were sharing their experience. So this is taken from the International Partners Forum, which Douglas mentioned, and this is from the summary of the meeting of over 20 partners. And the important thing to note here is that changing reality calls for the new forms of external quality assurance. However, I think the important message is that flexibility needs to come hand in hand with the integrity of the processes and the imperative of maintaining standards and quality. People need to feel confident that even in a virtual learning environment, the quality of the higher education experience is underlined by standards, the meeting of learning outcomes, and you can have a trust in the integrity of what's being delivered. The other key message, which I think came clear from Douglas's presentation, was the importance of working with the higher education sector, the importance of collaboration and working with institutions to ensure that the approaches that are adopted are fit for purpose. I mentioned earlier, a bit of a QAA fan club here, the taxonomy for digital learning, the importance of documents such as this, so that we're all using the same terminology, so that we all have a shared understanding of what it is we're talking about. This is from a 2007 UNESCO training on external quality assurance from Martin and Anthony Stella. And I think this point here is really important as we're looking for the flexibility and perhaps variation of the approach to external quality assurance. And this is still just as valid today, that the credibility of the external quality assurance is dependent on these factors, that the clarity in policies, the appropriateness of the framework, how transparent are the procedures, the integrity of the people involved, and the impact of the system. And whether it's a broadening of existing generic standards or whether it's a focus on online standards, the principles behind external quality assurance still exist. I'm going to focus now on looking at some of the online standards that already exist. There are a variety of standards, and here's just a sample of them. Interesting to note that both for the UAE and for Saudi Arabia, they have 2 sets of standards, one for face-to-face accreditation processes and one for online and distance learning standards. So looking at the Sloan Consortium, what do online standards look like? How do they differ from generic standards? And these from this 2015 Sloan Consortium Quality Scorecard give you an indication of where the focus lies. That here the focus is on technology, it's on course development and instructional design and course structure. They take up the biggest part of the indicators, and the social and student engagement, interestingly, which is still a key part of the higher education experience, takes a much smaller part of those quality indicators. So looking at a specific example, these are taken from the KSA standards. So if you have a look at the left-hand side, and if that's the those are the standards for institutional accreditation, and on the right-hand side, these are the academic accreditation standards for e-learning and distance education. So what's the difference between them? As you can see, the focus on the online standards is very much about how the institution is prepared for e-learning and distance education activities. So this is about how is it managed at a strategy and institutional level. So the focus is on how prepared is the institution for this. I think one of the key factors here is that quality has a key role in overcoming the stigma associated with online learning. Denise Casey in 2008 said, delivering higher education courses online holds greater promise and is subject to more suspicion than any other instructional mode in the 21st century. That there has been a sense of distrust, perhaps, in online learning, and external quality assurance has an important role to play in providing confidence to the government, to students, to stakeholders on the quality of the education, on the quality of the faculty, and everybody wants to know that it's meeting the required standards and that the integrity of the higher education experience is not being undermined through the delivery process. There was a review of 13 sets of standards in 2011. So this was 10 years ago, and this was carried out by Kay Shelton in the States. And this inverted triangle, I think, shows where the focus of online standards, of this particular set of standards, lies. So it's all about the institutional commitment, the teaching and learning. Happy to see faculty support up there. But down the bottom is student and faculty satisfaction. So if you like, the aspects of the educational experience that are perhaps much harder to capture in an online environment. Looking at a more recent review of 2017, this was based on 12 sets of online standards. And of the 650 standards involved, less than 7% focused on technology support, only around 5% on policies and planning, and just 4% on faculty support and satisfaction. Well, what does this mean? This means that we need to be careful that moving to specific standards for online and virtual learning doesn't narrow the scope of the expectations for the teaching and learning experience, that we need to still consider the skills that are developed in internships, in practica, the importance of support, the importance of the pastoral role of the institution in supporting the student learning experience, that what students are going through in terms of their own personal environment and experience are captured within some kind of standards. Policies and planning are really important when you've got instructors working perhaps in different environments. How do you ensure the consistency of delivery? How is that supported? And how does that reflect on the assessment and the academic integrity of the process? So what are the implications of all this for external quality assurance? The important thing is seeing that standards are fit for purpose for the whole of the academic learning experience, the context of online learning, but all aspects of the educational experience. That we need to ensure that the process itself is appropriate. For example, does a site visit reflect the student virtual experience? How do we get reviewers to see what the student sees on the other side of the screen? How do we get the reviewers to see what the faculty are experiencing on their side of the screen? So how do we capture that so that any kind of review activity really understands what's going on from screen to screen. The need to ensure that reviewers have the appropriate experience in virtual online learning and teaching. Reviewers come from a range of experience and backgrounds. How do we ensure that they have the skills to be able to review programs that are being delivered in a virtual format? And the key message of working with institutions in developing approaches to delivering effective online learning experience, how to really engage learners so that they don't switch off from the learning experience, and recognizing that external quality assurance is a driver for change, that the sort of standards and expectations that external quality assurance has can have a positive impact on what's happening within institutions. And really importantly, the need to support trust and confidence in virtual and online learning. And these are the areas that Douglas talked about before: the importance of academic integrity, the reliability of the assessment, and the maintenance of academic standards, so that students going out into the world can still walk with heads high with qualifications that have the value and the importance that needs to be recognized. Thank you very much for your attention today. Thank you for your interest.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Goodlife, for your comprehensive presentation about virtual learning and its implications on quality assurance reviews. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have 15 minutes for a question, and we will start tackling the questions that you posted. The first question that I have here is for Mr. Blackstock. What are the main challenges that are still being faced by QAA UK after a year of pandemic? And what are your future plans to address them, if any?
Sure. Well, some of them are very basic and very practical, Dr. Halla. I haven't seen my colleagues for a year. We've not been in the same room. We aren't able to travel to visit our institutions. We've not been able to travel and meet our colleagues internationally. We're very concerned, I think, as all employers, just as an employer, about the health and well-being of our staff. The safety of my colleagues is paramount, absolutely paramount, as is the safety of students and staff in institutions. We've all learned to adapt. You know, we're all, although I can't seem to operate PowerPoint on a Zoom call, we've all learned to work differently. You know, we've had Teams, we had Zoom, but we didn't use them very much, you know. So we adapting how we work, but adapt in a way that we still find the social aspects of work. And I don't mean going to parties, going to restaurants. I mean the chat with your colleagues on the way into the office, the chat over the lunch break when you're sitting around, just inquiring how someone's children are or their parents. And we've had, I think, 8 new staff start with QA in the last year. And they haven't met any of their colleagues, not at all. So the building of a cohesive organisation, I think, is still remains a challenge. Now, we moved out in part of restrictions lifted yesterday. We can now meet outside with 6 people. We'll have restaurants open outside in a few weeks. So hopefully, you know, as we have a very good vaccination rate in the UK, hopefully that will help us move on. But the one thing that we've learned, I personally have saved around 20 hours a week of traveling. My colleagues are telling me loud and clear, they don't want to go back to how it was before. They want a more flexible approach to working. We're probably going to go hybrid, a couple of days in the office, a couple of days on the road, some days at home. And but our overriding priority is, how do we design a new way of working that puts our staff where they need to be to support our institutions most effectively, and that's the driving factor. But we will probably end up with a much smaller office, much smaller working environment, and finding more effective ways to collaborate. But it's just, yeah, I suppose I should have said quite simply, the ongoing disruption.
Okay, how about Dr. Goodlife? Would you like to add anything about the challenges that will face everyone with the external quality assurance?
I think the fact that people keep talking about when we go back to normal, but I don't think there is a normal anymore. I think that there is a new normal, and nobody really knows what it looks like. I think it's a question of being prepared for anything. And it's an interesting skill set for us all to develop, being prepared to be flexible and still do what we do as effectively as we can, but bearing in mind, the environment's changing. And I'm based here in France, and the talk is of another lockdown tomorrow. So, the things that may have been planned, you have to be quick on your feet and quick on your thinking to be able to adapt, but still do what you need to do. And this is the same for individuals, for institutions, for agencies throughout the world.
Okay, so what are some educational gains that coincidentally resulted from the pandemic, and what is their impact on the external quality assurance practices? Dr. Goodlife?
I think that's a really good question. I think we're so quick to look at the crisis and the risk, and we forget some of the benefits that have been gained. I think there have been a number of institutions, in my experience, that have been playing around the periphery of going online and offering online education. And this has pushed them to look at how they can do it in an effective way. I think it's also pushed governments in parts of the world to recognize online learning. I think it's going to build trust. And the positive repercussions of this is that it means that there's greater access to higher education for many people who otherwise would have been in circumstances where they were environments where people perhaps distrusted online education. But if you can find that there's a way of quality assuring online education and supporting institutions in their provision, I think that's a positive outline, a positive output of this process.
I'm not sure if Dr. Hallis.
You nearly answered my following question, which is about the current challenges imposed by the pandemic impacting the way of QA agencies perceive their role. Does this situation impose a change in quality assurance agencies towards a more of capacity building and enhancement? Mr. Blackstock, would you like to shed some light on this?
Sure. I think Tess has hit the nail on the head in terms of not going back to the way it was before. I mean, I mentioned one thing earlier. I used an example with colleagues in a European discussion. We were able to conduct a review. Excuse me, there's a builder outside. I'll shut the window. We were conducting a review of QA by ENCA, and the visitors from the panel wanted to meet some students. And one of the students we wanted to meet them lived 500 miles away. Now, you can now meet that person without them having to travel by train, have to travel or stay overnight, all of the costs. And one of the things is it actually creates an opportunity to broaden the participation in review activities. So rather than requiring stakeholders to travel to a university and panelists to travel to a university, this democratizes the involvement. So for example, if you wanted to interview employers, well, they don't need to leave their workplace and come to the university. They can do it in their office or home environment. So I think that is one thing. I think the concept of the site visit has to change fundamentally. If you can gather large elements of material in advance, you could go for shorter, sharper focus, more efficient and more effective. And in terms of what we've done as a priority in this year, in QA this last year, has been focused on enhancement. Our campaign for this year is called Resilience, Innovation and Enhancement. And that's a big help in the sector to be, this is going to last for quite some time, the effects of this pandemic, and there might be others. If we get new variants, it's going to, so we've had innovation, Tess is right, a lot of accelerated change, which has been fantastic. Let's not give up on that. And then improvement going forward. Just on the last question that Tessa answered, one of the educational gains. I have observed that I've got 3 sons, two are doing master's degrees, one in final year of an undergraduate degree at the moment, and they've all got partners who are students. I'm seeing students rewatch their lectures 2, 3 and 4 times at 1.75 and 2 times speed because they can. And actually, so one of my sons said, Saturday mornings when I watch my lectures, and Wednesday afternoon is when I do my revision. And There's all sorts of things going on. It doesn't replace completely the physical, social elements you get of going to university, but it supplements and supports. So I think there's some fantastic things developing. And I don't think every institution will go completely digital, but I think most now will have some form of hybrid or blended experience.
I think Dr. Goodlife would like to add anything because of her experience with OAAA for a long time as a deputy CEO. Would you like to add anything, Dr. Goodlife?
In terms of the challenges for external quality assurance agencies, well, I'm happy to say I'm still working with the OAAA as an external review director, and we're currently piloting the program standards assessment for the accreditation of programs. And although originally it was going to be face-to-face, then there was a hybrid model, but now we're working with institutions to do it, or the whole visit and everything we're doing online. But in fact, that's kind of made the process easier in some ways, as Douglas has just referred to, is that you're getting a lot of documentation up front, that you're able to, we're working with what we call distance panel members who are not going to be part of the site visit, but are able to look thoroughly at the documentation and feed through the type of questions we need to ask. The sort of people that we're going to be talking to, we can talk to people from different areas who, as Douglas said, might not be able to come to the site visit. You know, they might be based in Muscat, and the institutions in Salalah, they wouldn't travel that far necessarily for a visit, but we can actually interview them online. So that's very positive. And I think, you know, all credit to agencies, as I mentioned in my presentation, that their ability to be active and dynamic in moving their activities forward so that they are fit for purpose, without making a great deal of disruption for the institutions, because I think we all have to respect the amount of work that institutions put in to these external reviews. So what we can do to kind of help the process be as easy as possible. For example, allowing panel members access to the learning management system before we get to the visit, so that the panel sees what the staff and students see. So I think that's very helpful.
Thank you. In your presentation, Dr. Goodlife, you referred to the role of external quality assurance as a driver for change in enhancing online learning experience with fully engaged learners. Would you elaborate further on this point, please, if it is possible?
Yeah. I mean, I think when you're looking at standards, and you know, a place like Oman has institutional and forthcoming program standards, and I think it's important to see that having an environment where you've got expectations, a quality code, standards can be drivers for change. For example, very often in the online environment, the aspect that's perhaps not addressed is student satisfaction, academic advising, student support. So if you've got some kind of standards, as there are certainly within Oman, where there's an expectation that the student experience the pastoral role, if you like, of the higher education environment is still supported, then it means that institutions need to think about, well, how are we managing this? How are we providing academic advising? And certainly my experience in Oman, that institutions have introduced online academic advising, that there's still been staff and student consultative groups that have been carried out online. I'm not saying that these wouldn't have happened anyway, but by having an expectation that they're going to be evaluated on the effectiveness of this means that there need to be policies in place, that there need to be these activities carried out even in a virtual and online environment. And often those are the aspects that fall by the way.
Thank you. I have a question now for both of you. How could we enhance employability with the current situation, keeping in mind the absence or lack of internship? And Mr. Blackstock, he referred to this point in his presentation. As you know, internship is a very important factor in preparing the students to join the workplace and bridging the gap between the workplace and academia. So, Mr. Blackstock, would you like to shed some light on this aspect, please?
Sure. I mean, I think this is one of the most significant issues. There are big issues such as student mental health and well-being, whatever. But in terms of particularly courses that move you into a profession, there are real challenges. Now, actually, in the health professions, many of the health professions, students have struggled actually to be free for the academic work because they've been moved in, they've gone into hospitals, they've gone into clinical settings, and they've got loads of practice in the public health response. But for others, so for us, one area has been optometry. It's been very difficult to run the clinical placements. Dentistry has been very difficult to run it. And so a couple of universities just haven't had the safe space to be able to run parts of those programs, and some students are deferring. So there's been a range of things happening. We have been talking to institutions. Institutions have been working with employers and professional bodies about alternative options. Are there other ways of gaining the experience you need, getting the practice you need? Are there ways of reverse engineering your course, and you have more of the theoretical with the hope that we would move out of restrictions, pushing some things towards the end of the program? Or some cases, how can you make an academic award, but then you supplement at a later date with a practical and clinical experience? And I think this generation have, I mean, we've all had it tough. I mean, it's terrible what's happened with all the deaths and the illness. But this generation of graduates have got a really challenging time. And we've just got to keep finding ways to adapt. Some people have moved into sort of virtual labs, but that takes a lot of it. You just don't turn those things on. That takes time. So I guess that we have published on our website, I put the guidance into COVID resources. We have published a document on, it's called Ongoing Implications for the Pandemic for Placements and Practice-Based Courses. And we've developed that through talking to colleagues in institutions. So I think it's going to keep evolving. And I just don't think there's an easy or a straight answer. We've got to just put the best support in we can. And Tess may want to come back on that.
I think it's quite interesting because what's happening to students is reflected in what's happening in the workplace. So the students automatically are developing skills in being able to work in a virtual environment, to be able to respond, to show resilience and flexibility, are going to be added to those list of skills that employers are looking for. Speaking from personal experience, my son is also doing a master's, and he had to do an internship as part of his master's, and 50% of that was carried out online as a member of the team in an organization. So expecting students to work in the same way, but that's fine for the non-practical courses. But I think there are issues around how do you provide students with the practical experience that they need, especially in the caring and medical professions and professions where they need to show real experience. I don't think there's a quick fix answer or a quick reply to that. I think it's an ongoing activity that all external, well, institutions primarily, and external quality assurance agencies are looking at. But in my presentation, I did refer to the fact that many of the online standards don't refer to any kind of practicum or expectation of real life experience. And that's something that perhaps needs to be considered not only for this time of pandemic, but after the pandemic, when we get back to whatever the new normal is going to look like.
Thank you. I've noticed that in Mr. Douglas' presentation, he talks about pressing issues. And one of the pressing issues that was tackled is program design and program offering, especially when we offer it online and virtually to the students. Do you think, of course, we are facing a great challenge here. So do you have any insights into this aspect when it comes to program design for online learning and our virtual situation which we are in now?
Yeah, well, I mean, all of the principles of how you design a program probably remain valid, but it's how do you do it effectively by a different mechanism. I know what I don't think good quality looks like. It's just recording the lectures you used to give, dump them on a VLE and leaving students to deal with it. So colleagues who are experts in digital delivery and have been doing this, Tess mentioned various open universities, been doing this for a long time. It takes time, effort and energy and a lot of commitment to develop a good digital program. Now, colleagues have adapted amazingly quickly across the world, but it's not how they would have done it. And so I think we'll probably need to get to a bit where we continue to have accelerated program development, but maybe slow it down a little bit so you can put the thought in and take student feedback as you go along. So I would stick with the same essence of, you know, what is it you're trying to deliver? What's the learning outcomes student need? How is this relevant for the employment market? How do you get the right staff with the right content to be able to deliver? What's the best way that you can engage students and the learning, any research they need to do? Someone's mentioned on the questions, building in robust assessment and secure assessment. I'll post a link in the answer to that question in a minute. I worked on a report with other colleagues called Assessment Rebooted. It was really looking at the future of digital assessment, because I think that's coming and really important. We talk a lot about developing authentic assessment to combat essay mills. So that actually, how do you, other than just someone submits an essay, you go back to somebody. When I was a student, you would discuss your essay in a seminar group. Some of those things re-emerging, so that actually you can test, does this person really know this? And I think that improves the life skills of students going into employment, your ability to put forward an argument and have a debate and discussion with your peers and your academic staff.
Thank you. Dr. Goodlife, would you like to add?
I think Douglas hits on a really important point. It's what we mentioned about this temptation to move back to jug to mug, the idea that you're putting a body of content online, but it's how you encourage that interaction, not only between tutor and student, but between the students themselves. And what can you do to kind of encourage an authentic communication with students? So, for example, whether it's working themselves to come up with an online presentation that they're going to give to the rest of the group so that they've still got an opportunity to work together. I think it's the links and the conversations that you have with students, which students have with each other, which is the hard part to recreate online. And it's whether you use breakout rooms, whether you give students assignments and assessments that require them to interact outside the forum of the MS Teams, Zoom, whatever it is, the medium that you're using. And I think that's the challenge, is to not lose out on that, if you like, the stuff that you don't always have within the curriculum, but the stuff that comes from the students themselves and the interaction with students. And how do you monitor that learning is taking place? When you're in a room with students, you can feel whether they're responding, you can see whether they're distracted, you can give them an opportunity to ask questions. Asking questions in an online environment is much more of a risk taker experience, because you show what you don't know, whereas you can go and see your tutor after a lesson or whatever. So to be able to talk to them and say, I wasn't quite clear about, how do you create a safe space for students to let you know whether or not learning is taking place? And I think that's something that still needs to be explored.
Thank you. I have so many questions about the assessment when we are teaching students online or when we are teaching students virtually. I'd like to ask you both about this point, but please keep in mind I have only 2 minutes left.
Okay.
I have so many questions that I can't ignore, especially this aspect about assessment. So let us start with Mr. Blackstock.
Sure. Look, I think this is all developing and emerging. There's a really live debate, isn't there, about remote proctoring, yes, and the extent to which you validate who a student is, and intrusion into people's homes via machine. I think there's a lot to be developed. I'm not an expert on assessment. I think we probably need to have a full event on just that alone. That's an obfuscation. Test me of other views. Can I just say one final thing? That we're beginning to see a bit of a trend that colleagues are saying to us about certain attainment gaps being closed, and some students doing better than expected, because one of the benefits of lockdown for them, although they maybe weren't able to undertake their part-time paid employment because many of the industries were closed, and they weren't able to go out and socialise, they had plenty of time for their studies. And some colleagues are reporting that they've seen an increase in student success as the lockdown meant they couldn't go anywhere else but get their head into their program.
Just picking up the academic integrity. I mean, I know that Douglas mentioned during his presentation, I know TEXA as well has been working. I mean, BQA had a presentation with Karen Trelaw and the team from Australia talking about the academic integrity aspect and the commitment that's being made to kind of ensure that students are doing their own work. And that's a fundamental part of when we were talking about the trust in the higher education learning online. I know that Douglas has mentioned about, you know, potential intrusion, but calling for more than one laptop to being used to assessment. I know in Oman that they've been calling for students to put their cameras on so you can see that they're actually there. Otherwise, they get automatically put in for a resit. So there are various policies that are being put in place, but they're all kind of responsive and reactive. And I think there needs to be a bit of breathing space to be able to come up with something that's reliable and that people can trust, because obviously academic integrity and robust assessment, how do you ensure that you haven't got a student in camera and somebody else sitting next to them on the keyboard? How do you ensure that? Do you get a camera on their hands? Do you have some kind of, you know, digital recognition presence? I know time is short, but it is a big issue and something we need to think about further.
Thanks a lot. This is all the questions that I can ask you on this question slot. I'd like to thank you all. Both the presentations were wonderful, and we learned a lot from both of them. Thanks a lot, Mr. Blackstock, and thanks a lot, Dr. Goodlife. Stay safe and hope to see you soon, both of you in Bahrain. Inshallah.
Shukran jazilan. Lovely to see you.
Thanks a lot.
Look forward to visiting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hala. الشكر والتقدير للمشاركين في الجلسة على ما تفضلوا بتقديمه. وبذلك نكون قد وصلنا إلى نهاية اليوم الأول من المؤتمر الذي سعدنا فيه بوجودكم معنا واستمتعنا بمشاركتكم القيمة فيه. فلكم منا كل الشكر وكل التقدير على أن نلتقي بإذن الله تعالى بكم غدا في اليوم الثاني من المؤتمر مع عدد من الجلسات القيمة والأطروحات المتميزة، مع تذكير بأن جلسات الغد تبدأ بإذن الله في تمام الساعة 10 صباحا. على أمل اللقاء بكم مجددا. دمتم في حفظ الله ورعايته، ومع السلامة.